very much. We have received some apologies. We've got apologies from Chris Friend and Andrew Bird as well. Thanks. And can we move to the minutes of the previous meeting? Are we happy to approve the minutes?
Agreed.
Agreed?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. All right, thank you very much. Next item is interest. Do any councillors have any interest to declare for this meeting?
I probably need to take advice because I think I'm a member of the advisory board for Kirklees Housing and Neighbourhoods. I don't know whether that causes me a problem or not.
I think you should be fine to be involved in the debate. We probably want that to be recorded, but I can't see a problem with you being involved. Joda, does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, that's fine. If you just fill out the interest forms, Councillor Taylor.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any interest to declare? No? Okay, if anything...
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Gwen. Yeah.
I use hot food takeaways. And I'm hungry.
Fair point.
Use or abuse?
Got a favourite one, I won't tell you which it is.
Yeah, maybe keep that to yourself for now. So obviously we do have an item on a hot food takeaways, and probably won't be human if no one's ever had a takeaway, I would presume. So I don't think we need to fill the form out for that, but thanks for raising that. Any other interest that anyone wants to declare? No? Okay, if anything does come up later, please just complete the form either by paper and post that in or electronically and send that on to Joda. Admissions of the public, so the meeting is online. It is available via YouTube, so members of the public can listen in as well. And obviously they are able to come and take part in the meetings as well, virtually. In terms of deputations and petitions, we haven't received any from members of the public. And public question time, again, we haven't received any questions from members of the public or councillors. Yes, Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks. Phone a friend. Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's nowhere else on the agenda to raise this, so I wonder if I could spot it here. Like you, I've been approached by residents in the Oak Road, Bradley and Leeds Road areas asking about the issue of potential calling for the Cooper Bridge scheme. One of the options open to us is if two members of this panel would consent to calling the scheme in. And it says one of them should be the chair, which is not a definitive. So, I mean, I had several concerns at that meeting, as indeed did you, Chair. So could I ask if either yourself or anybody else would be willing to be a co-signatory for a call-in, please?
Yeah, thank you for your comments there. And I know we've got Liz Smage here as well as chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, so she may want to have something to say about this because it's something that should the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee should be aware of. I should be notified about as well. So I agree, Martin. I've had a couple of emails about this as well from residents. Obviously, as a ward councillor, I've raised my concerns at Cabinet. For me personally, I've had to think about calling. I've had a look at the decision-making principles. So as part of calling, one of the things that needs to be done is you have to evidence a breach in decision-making principles, which are set out in a pro forma. Now, whilst I have some disagreements about the decision itself, I'm not clear personally that the decision-making principles have been breached. We have had pre-decision scrutiny at our scrutiny panel. There has been a public consultation. At Cabinet, we provided our views also about this. So personally, I'm not clear it's meeting the threshold on those decision-making principles for calling. But as you say, Martin, there are different routes to this. So 5 backbench councillors can put in for calling. It can be done by 2 members of this scrutiny panel. One should be the chair, but the Constitution does say should. So it could potentially be 2 of the members of the the scrutiny panel, and it can also be done by 2 members of Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. It has to be done within 5 days, so it would have to be done today by 5:30 p.m.
Sorry, 5
Yes.
days, 5 full
Working
from
days.
the issue of the decision notice. The
Absolutely.
decision notice was issued Thursday, so the clock started Friday. So we have until 5:30 p.m. on Thursday. And there has been some consultation. The key point that you and your colleagues brought out, there's been no public consultation on the diversion of HGVs away from Oak Road, and no public consultation information about where they'd go. Now, that is a significant issue in a highway scheme. If you're diverting HGVs potentially through Brooklands, Allendale and places like that, those people up until the cabinet meeting will be totally unaware that that was proposed for them. So I don't think there has been sufficient public consultation on that element. I think there's other issues that were highlighted, but yes, so leave it. If any colleagues from the panel wish to be a co-signatory, otherwise in responding to residents, we can look at other options. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the point on the 5 working days, man, I've just had a quick look. It was cabinet on the 12th, so it was on the Tuesday. So it would be it was last Tuesday that the cabinet meeting took place. So it would the call-in would have to be put in by today at 5:30 p.m. So that's 5 working days. So just to sort of clarify that point. Just also the only I see your point about the HGV. So I'm talking here more personally in terms of the concerns we raised about that. So absolutely the HGVs were raised as issues during the consultation period, and myself as ward and my ward members and yourself as well, Matthew, you've raised these points as well. And since then the officers did come back with some mitigations. Now, again, I still have some concerns, but it does show, again, some listening of concerns that were raised at the time. I guess the other thing I would say is at the cabinet approval for an outline business case, what they did say was that we should be listening to residents' views, and that this wasn't the final decision, and that also they did need to take into view the counts and the comments that were made by members as residents as well. So there was quite a bit about saying we need to have a think about this, and I think Councillor Kendrick made a particular point about only approving it on the basis of that it's not a done deal and that we do need to consider a different point. So I just wanted to bring that in as well, Martin. Councillor Smage had a hand up and she might want to say something about process, so I'll just see if she wants to come in. Councillor Smage?
Yeah, no, I think you've covered it actually. The standard period of 5 full working days commences the next working day following the decision, the day the decision is taken. Martin, it's paragraph 18.2 in the relevant constitution. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. Yes, I was thinking it was the day the decision notice was issued, but the day the decision is taken. So, yeah, as you say, that's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and up to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And Councillor Idale, I can see you've got your hand up.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I think this is democracy in work. The call-in is democracy actually working and giving the public every opportunity to have their say, and therefore I would support it.
Okay, so that's fine. You can do that. I guess I just want to make clear where I'm coming from as the chair of this panel and as a ward member. I guess for me is I still think there's a number of routes we can go through to raise the concerns of residents. And I, as a ward member and with my other ward colleagues, will continue to do that. And I don't think the scheme's perfect. It needs improving, and we'll continue to do that. So I just wanted to make that point clear in terms of where we're not certainly giving up on that. In terms of the process that you're mentioning, if you and Martin wanted to go ahead and do a call-in on this, what you'd have to do is complete a pro forma. Now, what Jodie can do is she can send you the pro forma, and within that, you'd have to say who the members are who want the call-in, and then you have to go through the sort of decision-making principles and say which one you think might have been breached and give some evidence of that. Then that needs to go to the borough solicitor, who's Julie Muscroft. I think there's a few other people that need copying in to that as well. And then Julie Muscroft, as the borough solicitor, she makes the decision to say, yes, it can go to call-in, and then call-in would have to happen within 2 weeks of when that decision's been made. So there is that option to do so, but that would have to be done by 5:30 today. From my understanding, it would still be 5:30 today.
No pressure then.
No pressure. I know the deadline is.
It would be easier if this
quite...
information was readily accessible online, Chair, as well. I mean,
yes.
Officers have been good in supplying it, but the calling procedure refers to the protocol. Valid calling must be submitted at 18.5 Liz, in paper or electronically on a pro forma provided, but the pro forma isn't provided on that information. So then you have to go to somebody and say, right, where is this pro forma? It's almost as if there's putting obstacles in the way of it. So yeah, a decent form will see on the pro forma provided now that it will be there as appendix or as a hyperlink.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Martin. Maybe that needs to be reviewed again, and hopefully other people are hearing this, and Jodie can make a note of that as well. I think that's a fair point. If they're pointing to a pro forma, it would be helpful if the pro forma was available. But what Jodie can do is she can send you the pro forma now, so you've got the details of it. And then if you think you're able to evidence what you need to evidence, then please do fill it in. Put Robert. There is a bit of a discrepancy in the pro forma compared to what the Constitution says, but from what the Constitution says, it does say you can have 2 members from the scrutiny panel. One should be the chair, but it doesn't have to be the chair. It says should, it doesn't say have to. Yeah. It's not so clear in the pro forma, but I think if you put it in, I think that'd be helpful. And Liz has heard, it does say the chair of the Overview Scrutiny Management Committee should be notified. Liz is on the call, so she has heard this conversation at least. So you may want to do some follow up, but she has heard this at least. Is that okay, Martin?
Thanks very much, Chair. Okay,
no problem. So Jodie, if you just get that sent through, then at least Martin's got that. Okay, thank you very much. What I'm going to do then is move on to Kirklees Homes and Neighbourhoods. We're looking at, well, this item's going to consider, well, it's going to provide an update on the transfer from what was K&H to Homes and Neighbourhoods. Naz Parker and Eric Hughes are here. Naz, I know you have to go at 1:30, so I don't know if you wanted to say, oh, there you are. I couldn't see you there for a minute. I don't know if you want to say anything before you need to sort of...
Yes, please, if I may, Chair, and thank you. And as you say, this is a paper that's intended to bring Scrutiny Panel up to date with where we are with the transfer activities of transferring the engagements of K&H into a new service within the council. The newly formed service is Homes and Neighbourhoods. Now, Eric's here and is going to, if you need us to take you through the detail of the paper, we can do. However, just in headline terms, it's important to note that the transfer is now broadly complete, save some formalities of deregistering a company house, etc. I would say this has been largely successful. We had some early issues that any large change of this nature takes in terms of little wrinkles in the IT element of it, but broadly it's been great. Everybody had a warm welcome, 800 staff being welcomed into the council. Everybody had their own email address, which is a feat and a half, I have to say, but it was broadly successful. The unions were comfortable with the way the process had been managed and went as far as advising us that this was probably the smoothest TUPE transfer they've been part of. So people have been kept informed and engaged along the way, and people's roles and responsibilities were kept clear, and what their end destination within the council was as well. I guess now, given that we are inside of the council as of 1st April, we've been using this year to focus in on consolidating the service and embedding the service within the broader council. And as you'll know from previous reporting, Chair, that we have been fully focused on certainly ensuring that our high-rise tenants are kept fully safe, but also in terms of the broader stock, addressing any compliance issues. So that's been a key focus, whilst at the same time, though, that we've kept an eye to the future and our strategic ambition to align services to work in a restorative way and work in a place-based way. And I would say K&H were a good example of place-based working and using the place standard tool, and have many examples of doing that in their history, and we continue that. And so we've been preparing for the transformation of the service, engaging with our stakeholders on what excellence looks like, taking the feedback from tenant engagement, but also from the satisfaction survey that we run annually, and sort of intending to amplify the tenant's voice in all the decisions that the council takes. So really, I didn't want to say any more than that, Chair, and leave it to the discussion, but if you wanted Eric to walk you through the paper, then we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that might be helpful, Eric. And did you have some slides you wanted to show as well?
Yes, we do, if that's okay, Chair. We just thought it would be good. Apologies if this is teaching people that they're sucking eggs, because I'm sure you already know. I know Councillor Taylor will, being on the board of K&H, which is still his declaration at the moment. But we thought it would be helpful just to provide that context and just talk through the process that we've gone through, because you'll hear us talk about transfer, transition and transform, and that's very much the path that we're on at the moment. So, Jodie, would you mind bringing those slides up? So this is a short presentation just to talk through how K&H has transferred into Homes and Neighbourhoods, to give you a little bit of background as to the process. Jodie, next slide. There's a slight time delay, isn't there? I'll maybe speak a little bit quicker. As I'm sure everybody knows, the council took the final decision to transfer K&H back into the council in October 2020, though indeed the direction of travel was already known before that date, and therefore planning had to take place, because, as Nazza said, with a transfer of this size and complexity, you certainly couldn't just leave it for the last 6 months of a financial year to... I'm not quite sure where I'm talking to at the moment. You certainly couldn't leave it just the last 6 months of the year. So we'd started planning before October, but obviously once the final decision was taken, we were able to enact the things that we were starting to put into place. I'm pleased to say, and the report itself focuses primarily on that transfer activity, which takes us up to the 1st of April this year, and all of the work that took place in the background to make sure that that transfer was as smooth as possible, as Naz has talked about. We are currently in this year what we're calling our transition or alignment year, which is very much focused on aligning our policies and procedures, linking in with council strategies, and making sure that our staff are well embedded, not just within our new Homes and Neighbourhood service, but some of the corporate services of K&H, such as IT, HR, organisational development, marketing, etc. They transferred into the corporate teams in the centre of the council. So obviously, as Naz said, that warm welcome and embedding those teams has been a critical part of our succession journey this year. And we're very much focusing for the future on our service excellence initiative and building that into our place-based working and green agendas that I'll talk about a little bit later. Jodie, would you move on? Just to remind ourselves that the Homes and Neighbourhood Service is part of the General Fund. It is actually funded through the Housing Revenue Account, which is funded obviously by the tenants' rents. So it's particularly focused on that £80 million worth of activity to deliver the repairs and maintenance and housing management services to our tenants and customers across Kirklees. And as part of that, and as part of our regulatory engagement, this paper doesn't go into that level of detail around regulation, but we are required to present and demonstrate value for money to our tenants and to the regulator for the services that we provide. Next slide, Jodie. I think before we actually talk about what we do, it might also be useful to remind ourselves that we are only part of the housing services of the council. We focus very much on the delivery of the housing maintenance and repairs services and the housing management services and neighbourhood services. But our colleagues in housing services itself in the council, they're the people that deal with homelessness, deal with the housing registers, deal with things like aids and adaptations, because obviously that takes you beyond the rented housing stock of the council and into the private rented sector and to the private sector completely, where people are looking at adaptations, etc. So it's useful to remind ourselves of that definition, that this is very much focused on housing maintenance and management services that we want to look at in the future. Jodie, would you move on? So what does our housing management service do? Well, we look after the 21,000 properties that are still owned by the council directly ourselves, but we also look after another 1,500 properties on behalf of others, such as the Pinnacle PFI project, some other smaller arms houses and other associations. We manage management and caretaking and work geographically across patches. We manage 19 retirement living schemes, which have around 1,200 occupants. We respond on average to 82,000 phone calls and emails from our customers each year, and rehouse as part of the service to the council around 1,700 people. So that's 1,700 people getting a new start in life and a new home every year as part of the services that we're providing in conjunction with the housing services of the council. And that, you know, people talk about the waiting list, but there actually technically isn't a waiting list because of the choice-based letting system. But we're making sure that at least 1,700 families every year are getting that new start in life. And we provide a range of other services such as debt advice, also entry to employment initiatives and things like that, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, particularly to our tenants and communities that we serve. Next slide, please. A core part of our offer, and we've always had a very strong relationship with our tenants, is hearing the tenant's voice. We use this very much now in a restorative place-based operating model. We look very much at increasing our environmental improvements. We want to make sure that our capital programs are being delivered not just by our thought as to what reinvestment should be, but also you know, what our tenants want and desire. So when we're talking about things like changes to Berry Brow, we're very much already engaged with the tenants and customers there to make sure they're at the heart of our decision making. So they're not just being kept informed as to the potential decisions that are being made, but they're being very much engaged with from the point of view of how those decisions will affect them and how we can support them through those kinds of transition processes. And Michelle, that's on our call today, I'm sure would talk a lot more about that if I let her. Maybe at the minute I'll just work through these slides and we'll pick the questions up at the end, Chair. We very much focus on planning conferences with our tenants. Unfortunately, obviously, some of those things have been put on hold due to COVID over the last 18 months or so. But I know Michelle and her team are very much looking at the next tenants conference, focusing on our STAR feedback mechanism, which has over 2,000 tenants provide us with feedback every year as to the quality of the services that we're providing. And we're very much developing an action plan in response to that. And our challenge panel, which is made up of tenants, do deep dives as our own internal scrutiny mechanism to look at areas of our service delivery to improve that from the tenant's perspective. Next slide. Again, slightly put on hold because of COVID. We have a very active role in tenant estate action days, weed removals, litter picks, looking at ways of improving place-based work with other colleagues, whether it's street cleansing or other highway services, etc. But also consultations with people, looking at improvements to their neighbourhoods and how that can be embedded in the service. Chair, I can see Councillor's got his hand up. Do you want to take questions as we go?
Robert, did you want to come in now or I'll wait till the end?
I'll wait to the end. I'll
Okay.
wait to the end. No.
Perfect. Thank you,
I
Robert.
thought I'd get my hand in first.
Okay. He's ready.
No harm in that. I'll move on to the next slide then, Chair. Again, as part of our response in estate action, we deal very much and work with colleagues in the council around antisocial behaviour, supporting victims through the process, identifying hotspots, very much looking at place-based responses to antisocial behaviour, what community triggers might be prompting some antisocial behaviour in different areas. And very much a focus of us moving forward is looking at supporting our tenants' customers with some of their mental health needs, which are an aggravating factor to lots of antisocial behaviour cases. And our Tenants Advisory and Grant Panel are very much involved in shaping and informing the policy and procedures in response to antisocial behaviour in our neighbourhoods. Next slide. Our repairs service, if people don't already know, provides nearly 90,000 repairs every year. Now, they're responsive repairs, so that's things like a door that's coming off its hinges or a gas boiler that doesn't work. That is not the reinvestment programs, improving things like insulation or other things, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. We have very good compliance with our gas and electrical safety regime, and we're extending that across the other big six you might hear us talk about, which is water, asbestos, Legionella, and lift sort of compliance over the next few years. And again, our repairs team do all of those voids work on those 1,700 to 1,800 properties every year that become vacant and ready for re-let. Particularly over the last couple of years, we've been focused on the enhanced lettable standard, which is an enhanced standard that the council has agreed to. So for certain tenants, say, for example, young people leaving care, to give them the best start in life, the council has taken the decision to provide an enhanced lettable standard where things like carpets and curtains and other items are put into the property to make it much more livable from day one, to make sure that those tenancies are much more sustainable. And we adapt something like 350 properties each year as part of our aids and adaptations program to make sure that people can live in their properties for longer and can get the enjoyment of the services and the neighbourhoods in which they live. And we deliver on average £12 million worth of capital works, not just for our own properties, but also for things like Civic 3 at the moment. The developments there are being those changes to Civic 3 are being done by our maintenance service as we speak. Next slide. Just to make members aware that we have an MCS accreditation, which enables us to put in things like renewable technologies such as air source heat pumps, etc. So again, we're very much focused on the future for the green agenda that we know that we're going to have to invest in heavily in our properties over the next few years. So we're making sure our workforce is well equipped and skilled to be able to do that. And locally, we put something a little over £3 million back into the economy through subcontractors. So again, this is very much part of that focus of homes and neighbourhoods, not just being the local provider ourselves, but making sure that other providers and the local economy is being used as much as possible. So our spend is getting as much leverage in the local area as we can. And on average, we have around 50 apprentices each year working not just in property services, but across the business, whether it's in HR or a gas engineer, to make sure that we're reskilling people and bringing on the next generation of talent. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. And over the last 18 months, we've been a major contributor to the council's response to COVID, building test centres and sort of injection centres across the authority. But we also run internally the PPE store on behalf of not just the authority, but the whole of West Yorkshire. So we've delivered literally millions of items of PPE to some 900 schools, care homes and other areas and other facilities across West Yorkshire over the last 18 months. And that's all been done primarily through our maintenance services and our core admin services, making sure that that is keeping as many people safe as possible. If we move on, Jodie. If we're looking at the future in our reinvestment programs, as you can see, we're looking at reinvesting 152 million over the next 10 years in our properties, or at least 8,000 of them, to bring them up not just to decent home standards, and you'll hear that, I'm sure, from the past, but also making sure that they're now getting energy efficient remedial works, as well as lots of other enhancements to the property. We definitely want to obviously approach building defects and making sure that all our properties demonstrate curb appeal. And again, you'll see some photographs a little bit later and artists' impressions of some of the things that we're going to do. So if we move on, Jodie. We're looking very much at reinvesting in new build. And whilst we haven't had a large rebuild programme over the last number of years, we are certainly looking at the likes of replacing Berry Brow, which is certainly a significant scheme on our behalf. And as I said, Michelle's team is very much already engaged with the residents there around how that scheme will shape up and take shape in the future. But we are looking at investing another 98 million in over the next 10 years to reduce the carbon footprint of our homes, and looking at different methods of construction to make sure that they are more energy efficient. We're looking at different properties from the point of view of rebuilds across 22 sites, and we're hoping to deliver some 977 units within this sort of time frame. So that's where the 150 million reinvestment is going. So if we move on just from the point of view, this is an artist's impression of one of the schemes that we're looking at developing out, and I'm sure you'll agree that they are very attractive. They certainly have the curb appeal that many of us will want to see going forward. Jodie, if we moved on. And again, from the carbon warm, from the reinvestment, we're looking to make sure that all of our properties reach at least Band C SAP rating by 2030. We've already, as part of the LADS programme, secured an additional £3 million from government to be able to help us do that. And we're starting with a 10-year programme of retrofit, which will go on over the next 10 years to do things such as you can see on the right, a scheme that we're going to work up. Unfortunately, it doesn't already look like the lower one of those two photographs. That's an artist's impression of what the kind of reinvestment we'll look at when we're actually doing these retrofit schemes to make sure that they work. And we're working with the likes of Groundwork Trust to ensure our customers don't just get an energy efficient house, but they're actually given the information to how they can reduce their carbon footprint and utilise their energy more efficiently, because clearly with increasing energy bills at this moment in time, that's of critical importance. So Jodie, if we move on. So moving to the council, as we said, 800 staff came, or roughly 800 staff came over, mainly within the Homes and Neighbourhood service, but some 80 odd staff moved into corporate services in the centre of the authority. We still have K&H, though it ceased trading on the 1st of April. It is still registered at Companies House, and as John will say, he knows as a current director of the company, we're just in the process of winding that company up as we speak. So we would hope that by Christmas, K&H, you've done my bit. we would hope by Christmas that will all be sorted. So the final vestige of K&H will have gone, and everything will now be in the Homes and Neighbourhood service. So as Homes and Neighbourhoods, we've gone through a rebranding exercise to call ourselves Homes and Neighbourhoods. You will start to see more Homes and Neighbourhoods vans actually out on the street. We've actually taken 30 electric vans, which have already come with the Homes and Neighbourhoods brand, and we're going through the process of rebranding the remainder of the vans over the next few months, so that by April next year, all vans, etc., will be Homes and Neighbourhoods liveried, so that transition will be complete. During this year, as part of the transition phase, we've undertaken quite a large exercise to engage with our stakeholders, and they're both internal and external. Internal amongst our staff, but external and council colleagues, but also external with people like the fire service, police, ambulance service, etc. Because obviously these are our partners that do very much work with us in our neighbourhoods and communities, and we want to make sure that we can take that forward properly. We are therefore in the process of researching and finalising some options for our future business plan, which will come into force from 2022. And as part of this transition, we have started up the Housing Advisory Board as the new focus for scrutiny for our housing activities within the borough. That body has Councillor Scott as its chair. It has up to six tenant members. There are currently 5, and 4 co-optees, along with David Shepherd as the strategic director. They've had some induction. They've had the first 3 or 4 meetings. And thus far, I would say that transition board is really bedding in and looking to perform really well on behalf of the council going forward. In the transformation phase, which will take place, as you can see in the report, from 2022 onwards, we're very much looking at embedding our service excellence project and developing and delivering a new service model going forward, which will be part of our new business plan. So if you could move on. As part of that, we've used what we've known as our service excellence project, our EFQM model. So we focus very much on that results side at the moment, which is consulting with our people, customers, broader society, stakeholders such as the emergency services, health services, etc. And the outcome of that is driving a set of papers which are coming through to our Housing Advisory Board and portfolio holder in November, talking about the key objectives that we want to see in our business plan from 2022 onwards. And that will very much shape the way that we're delivering our leadership, our people management, our policy and strategy, and our processes, because as you will see that we are investing heavily in our new housing management system, and we're wanting to progress and reinvest in our assets maintenance system and our repairs system going forward, so we have the tools to really deliver a slick and joined up service to our tenants and customers and communities. We're very much linking that with our corporate objectives, so things around the place-based working, the green agenda, restorative practice, etc., and that sort of focus on joining services up right across the council and making sure that homes and neighbourhoods is an integral part of that service delivery has really been one of our key drivers. Move on, Jodie. We haven't stopped doing things as we've taken this time out to look at the future. So we are constantly looking at improving things, no matter what our future service excellence project looks like. So as I've mentioned, we're very much looking at current improvements such as a new housing management system. We're looking at the high-rise changes from the point of view of Berry Brow, Buxton House and Harold Wilson Court. We've been focused very much on our extra care development and management of those services, delivering better work to employment programmes, pre-apprenticeship programmes, and looking at the succession plan within our own staff. And that's why we're very committed to those entry to employment traineeships and apprenticeships, because we, like other parts of the authority, do have an ageing workforce, and we've identified that, and we're making sure that we're planning for the future. Jodie, next slide. So finally, obviously we're looking very much at working with housing options and young people services to increase a pathway for tenants under 25, and that's where things like the enhanced lettable standard are a cornerstone of that offer. We want to tackle health inequalities, and we're working with council colleagues and public health to look at health screening for childhood asthma. And again, we're very much wanting to strengthen the tenants' voice through the Housing Advisory Board and the Tenants Advisory and Grants Panel to make sure tenants and customers are absolutely at the heart of everything that we do. So I think in conclusion, whilst we're still in this transition year, we're very much making good progress from the point of view of we've done the transition, we're starting to transform and identify the key things our service wants to deliver from 2022 onwards in our new business plan. And this is our opportunity to really have that consultation and bring tenants to the forefront of everything that we want to do. Jodie, final slide. So I'm happy to take any questions either on the presentation or the paper that's been put forward, Chair.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much for that, Eric. Very helpful presentation. And I know we've got Michelle here as well, who can help with the answering the questions. So I'm going to start off with Robert. Robert, do you want to go ahead?
Right. Thank you, Chair. I come from the perspective of being both a very old and a brand new member, having been just re-elected in May. So in some ways I'm comparing apples and pears, you may think, but firstly, how many tenants associations have we now got? Are we improving the tenants' voice? Because it's vital that the tenants' voice is paramount because it's their homes.
It is, and I'll start, and I'm sure Michelle will give you a lot more detail than I can. We are very much focused on the tenants' voice, as I've tried to point out in the presentation, and that's why I thought the presentation was important. The Housing Advisory Board has 50% of its membership which are tenants. The Housing Advisory and Grants Panel is 100% tenants, and we use those as the cornerstone of part of our tenants' voice. But we very much want to use things like the STAR surveys. We have lots of regular transactional surveys. So as a tenant gets a repair done this week, next week they'll get a text message to say, can you give us some feedback? Did it go well? Did it not? And we use that feedback where it's negative to contact the customer and learn from that experience. So the tenant's voice for us is, yes, of course, around those tenants advisory and grants panels, which are around for a long period of time, but we're very much extending beyond that to give other opportunities for tenants. And I think that's where we had a really good response to the Housing Advisory Board. We wrote out to tenants and we sent text messages, etc., to say, here's a new opportunity. It's a way of you getting your voice heard. Will you put your name forward? And we have, was it 50, 52, 53,
Yeah.
Michelle,
Yeah.
responses to that? And the vast majority of those were people who were new to us from the point of view of engagement in the past. So we're very much looking towards bringing in that new voice as well as using the traditional mechanisms. So I think we're very focused on making sure the tenant's voice is heard, and that's something which is going to be, when it comes out, when the white paper becomes a bill and an act. We're very much focused on making sure that's a cornerstone of what we do. Michelle, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you for that, Eric. I'd just add, in relation to the Tenant and Resident Association specifically, we still have 40, which, when we make a comparison across the sector, is quite a high number. So that's the strength of Kirklees. There have been challenges during COVID in terms of support and keeping them going, but we have started again since the summer this year. We've started working with them, refreshing their business plans in terms of what activities they want to do, bringing community organisations in and making sure we make the best use of our community buildings that a lot of our TRAs still run, and we're doing that using the place standard approach. So they are still there, but as Eric said, they're just one of a number of ways in which tenants can have a strong voice.
Thank you. And on a home visit, I have now recommenced doing home visits to tenants, which were stopped due to the COVID.
Well, they were never completely stopped due to COVID. They were always risk assessed. I would absolutely agree with you that they reduced considerably, because wherever things could be done over the phone or obviously remotely, they were done in that way to protect the tenants as well as our staff. The housing management side isn't my area of expertise in the business, so I can't give you an exact sort of feeling for numbers of visits pre-pandemic and currently, but certainly we're seeing estate walkabouts taking place. We're seeing individual direct face-to-face contact with tenants and customers, particularly now as the customer service centres are starting to reopen up as well. We'll expect quite a bit more of that to be taking place. Unfortunately, I can't give you a sort of we're at a 50% level or 100% level or anything like that, because I just don't have that information. I could find it out for your council if that's what you'd like.
Yes, please. And finally, for me, I have for the last 20 odd years worked with these 1,500 others that you deal with. I've been a board member for the KCA.
Oh, yes.
We were set up to track, because we were different to the council, to be able to do things that the council couldn't for legal reasons. We've gone from one small block of houses up to about 250 houses now. There does appear to have been, over the last few years, a lack of joint ventures or anything at all. You've rather cut us adrift, and we are very concerned, because we do. It's your housing that puts the tenants in, and we're very concerned that we would like a steer of how you want us to work. Otherwise, we're just a housing association. I mean, we did think we have done things. We've got finance, and we're talking millions, and virtually we just go our own way. Which we've got about several councillors on the board.
Well, I think that's probably slightly beyond me to answer that totality of that question, councillor.
Yeah.
Because obviously, from the point of view of the homes and neighbourhoods and Kirklees neighbourhood housing previously, relationship with KCA, we've provided that housing management service on your behalf. The broader strategic relationship is one that I think needs to be picked up with the authority itself, potentially with the Economy and Infrastructure Directorate, from the point of view of what those future plans are, because we ourselves, we have our plans from the point of view of our housing redevelopment, etc., which is obviously focused very much on social housing and social rented properties. But other strategic options, that's a broader council decision, not one just for our service area, I don't think.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. That's about all my questions done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Bring in John.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that, Eric. I've got a number of questions really, but I'm going to start with something that's quite topical, and this refers to COVID. So one of the things I think we're starting to learn about COVID, one of the mitigants we need to have in place when trying to prevent the spread of COVID is good ventilation. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the three public health recommendations that the council is following at the moment. Now, I know from my own experience, and I'm sure my fellow councillor colleagues on this call will have experiences themselves, numbers of experiences of issues around dampness or mould in council properties, often where you're going back multiple times. And I know I've talked to Assad about this in the past. We quite rightly immediately reacted to the problems with cladding and high-rise flats and put in place a piece of work to do an assessment, and now we're following through on the actions that are needed for that. What risk assessment has been done around ventilation in our council properties, and where does it sit on our risk register, and who's owning that issue at the moment?
Well, from the point of view of the risk register, it's owned by the service, and obviously the Decent Home Standard requires us to provide a property that doesn't have damp or mould or other things, because that's part of the current standard and is something that we would very much want to respond to. From the point of view of plans to move forward, I know Assad, and again, he's not on this call, so I can only get him to come back to you, Councillor Taylor, if that's what you require. Has had plans to go forward with doing further in-depth surveys, because we do believe there are particular properties in particular areas that seem to be more vulnerable to this than others. So I know there are further surveys planned, but I can't give you any detail as to those kinds of things.
I think if I could ask that's taken away, because it is an issue that worries me, and I think it should be given the same priority and urgency that we gave to the cladding on high-rise flats, and I just don't get the feel at the moment that anybody's clocked it.
I do think we have clocked it. I think we're very aware of issues. That's what I say. There is already a good indication that there are certain properties in certain areas that are more susceptible to damp and mould than, if you can call it, the generic stock. And that's where Assad in the past and Carl, our new interim head of assets, is looking at developing programs to investigate those things further, and obviously then put some programs in place to take whatever remedial action is required. Okay.
My other question, well, I've got two questions actually. I'll do the easy one first. I think I'm on the advisory board. You'll probably know, Eric.
No, you're not. You're still on Kirklees neighbourhood housing until that's wound up.
So do then I end up on the advisory board?
No, you don't. We've already.
End?
Sorry?
Does my involvement end then as a councillor?
It does, yes.
Because I thought I'd been appointed to something as part of the reappointment to external bodies in May, but I need to go away and check that then.
It was Kirklees neighbourhood housing, because obviously with that still continuing as although it was a non-trading entity, It has continued as a body, so we needed to get you still appointed to that, because otherwise we'd have had a bit of a pickle if we'd have had no directors of the company to wind it up.
So do we have no councillors sitting on an advisory board?
Just Councillor Scott as chair of the board.
Right.
So we have Councillor Scott, we have up to six tenant members of that housing advisory board, 4 co-optees who are people that bring particular industry expertise into the board, and then there's David Shepherd as well. So that's the 12 advisory board members.
Right. So I'm not entirely comfortable with that. I mean, I guess that's a decision the administration's taken, isn't it? Because I think there should be, you know, there's a reason why we're elected representatives. We're here to represent the communities that we're elected by, and I feel that we're being removed from having a voice. And stay with me, Eric. And that leads me to my other question. One of the things I was keen to see as part of this transition back into the council is a lot of the things that K&H did exceptionally well. I wanted to see those things being available to more than just the council house tenants. So when we talk about, you know, debt advice services or entry to employment initiatives or estate days, all of that help and support that we give to communities, all of our residents are council taxpayers. All of our residents should be treated equally and given the same support. So what plans are there to extend? Because I'm worried that all we talk about is tenants. Mm-hmm. And actually, the whole point of bringing the service back in-house was so that knowledge and experience could be used to support all communities. And at the moment, I'm not hearing that.
Well, I mean, I think Michelle will be able to tell you many projects and initiatives that she and her team are already working on in these estate walkabouts, etc. And that's very much what we focused on in the consultation that we've been undertaking over the last few months.
To be fair, Eric, that's my problem. Mm-hmm. If you're only doing estate walkabouts, you're only going round the properties that are owned by K&H. What about people who are in poor rented accommodation elsewhere? Mm-hmm. What support are we giving them?
Well, that ultimately does become a slightly broader council decision on two parts.
That was the whole point of bringing K&H back in.
Well,
we could use that expertise more broadly rather than just to tenants.
And we're certainly happy to share that expertise, and that's part of what we're trying to do within this place-based working approach that we're consulting with our colleagues across the authority about. We do still have to be minded that, as I pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, Homes and Neighbourhoods is actually funded through the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, which is that tenant's rent money. So they do, and quite rightly so, have a first call on that rent money from the point of view of how that's reinvested. So we can't just take that pot and say, oh, I can use this in an area where there's no council tenants at all. But we can certainly work with our colleagues in the authority, because actually many of the things that we come across from an actual estate walkabout issue are things like highways issues. You know, it's about parking, it's about street lighting, it's about these kinds of things, which are actually those general fund activities.
I hear you, but you're going about and doing these walkabouts and uncovering these issues on the council's owned estates, but you're not doing it on the neighbouring streets. And yet those people are all paying their council tax as well. And the whole point of bringing you back in was so that we could make sure that all of our residents are treated equally. And it feels like we're not treating all of our residents equally at the moment.
Well, I still think we're in that transition. And as I say, we are very much trying to reach out to our council colleagues and work in that joined up way that you're trying to indicate, Councillor Taylor. But obviously, we don't have the resource at present to necessarily cover the whole of the borough.
So all I'm saying is we've talked a lot about transition and future plans, but I've heard nothing about how that experience and expertise is going to be shared more broadly. It all feels a little internally focused at the moment. Go on, Michelle.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think Eric's right. You know, in terms of the ask of tenants and the fact that they're paying, so they pay council tax as well, and then they pay rent on top. So there are certain things that, you know, we are and we have to honour in terms of our council tenants. But you're right, and a lot of the work that we've started, so at the moment we're doing work with public health around increasing screening on particular areas in North Kirklees. We are doing it because we recognise there's an issue on council estates, but we're doing it in the whole area. So it will take into account others. There's some of the employment programmes that we work on are for anybody in Kirklees. What we do is use that unique relationship we have with our tenants to make sure that they are equally included. We managed, we've just finished last year, the Hillside project, private rented, but we used our expertise and that of council officers around place standard to do a piece of work in Hillside. It may not be happening as fast as we would like it, and I'm sure as fast as yourselves would like it, but we are using the expertise that comes from within homes and neighbourhoods and other parts of the council to deliver the best outcomes for everyone. It's probably not going as fast as we'd all like, but we are absolutely doing that. So where we've done place standard, we haven't said we can talk to you because you're a tenant and not. We have looked at the whole place because, quite rightly, what benefits our tenants and their environment and the place where they live, you know, equally will benefit everybody else in that area, and we have to look at that in the round. So it's not that we're ignoring them. There are certain things that we have to do for tenants because they're paying for that, but any environmental stuff, community safety, we look at it in the round.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Just on place standard, because I'm a huge advocate of place standard. I was one of the early adopters. I have been a bit worried, and it's partly a COVID impact, but we seem to have lost some of what really is the power of place standard. And the power of place standard that I learned when I did it, I did two villages in my patch, and also helped out on a couple of the schemes in the town centre for the master plan. That the strength of it was talking to people who didn't want to talk to you. And actually, what we seem to have slipped back into now is we'll put a survey online. We'll put out some, and we need to go out and talk to people who don't want to talk to us. For me, it was going to the co-op on a Friday night as people were going in to buy the bottle of wine and doorstepping them, because these are people who never ever respond to public consultations, and that's where the real value is. And I do worry the last 2 years. I mean, I in my own village, we got over 400 responses. I've just seen recently we've done one in Home Firth, which is much bigger, and they got 235, and they thought that was a good response. And it's just left me feeling a little uncomfortable that we've lost some of what the real power is. So can we just go back to going out and doorstepping people and talking to people who don't want to talk to us? You follow my drift.
Just on that, if it's okay, Councillor Uppal, I'll just say, Councillor Taylor, you're absolutely right. And yeah, COVID has had an impact, but we've just completed the high-rise consultation this year. And that was with really, with transient population, really difficult and hard to reach tenants. But we had an average of 75% response rates because we did exactly what you did, what you said. We had it online, we had it in paper, we went door to door because we could. COVID still allowed us. So we absolutely are in agreement. We use the basis of place standard to engage. It's not one size fits all. It's not going out once. It's catching people in the car park. So we had staff in the car park. Probably was a nuisance to some people, but they were in the car park. So you could try and catch everybody. And that's what, you're right, delivered the results of over 75%. So that we knew that the decision that the cabinet took this year in terms of the future of the high rise was well informed by tenants.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll shut up now, Chair.
All right, thank you. I can see Peter, you had your hand up, Peter McBride. I didn't know if you wanted to respond at this point.
Yeah, thank you. I think John's raised some very good points. I think the essential issue is saying, if we can do this for our tenants, why aren't we doing it more widely? It's a very fair question. In many respects, it is done more widely, but it's very focused in the housing service, particularly with the creation of K&H. the total integration back, I think, will lead to a better joining up. But the essential problem that John raises needs to be addressed. To what extent do we have a common policy between, on the one hand, the council houses, which are about still remaining about 21,000, and the rest of housing? Because what's relevant to them, for the most part, is relevant to all the rest. And I think that issue needs to be addressed. I think further, we've talked about all the involvement of everybody. In all the papers I've seen so far, I can see no reference of how they're going to involve councillors better and more, or even the way they used to before K&H was created. That is an essential issue. The involvement of councillors currently is minimal, and that needs addressing. And if there was such an involvement, those kind of questions that John raises wouldn't arise, because everybody would be aware of the way in which it works. The fact that it isn't tells us its own story. And now, to be fair to you, you're sort of coming out of K&H, is learning, in a sense, how to fully integrate back to be the backbone of the provision of a service. But you've got two arms to your policy, in a sense. The most immediate is you must deliver for 21,000 people. But then you have a wider remit relating to housing as a whole. That, unfortunately, has got to be our secondary consideration. I think we need something which makes sure that the primary consideration is overall housing, which is the essence of the point John's making, which I think is perfectly valid.
Thank you, Peter, and I'm sure that's noted. So I'm going to move on now to Gwen.
Thank you, Chair. Eric, thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed that presentation. Unfortunately, my little grey cells aren't as absorbent as they used to be, so a copy of the slides would be much appreciated, please.
Jodie has a copy, and I'm sure she'll send them on to you, Councillor.
Right. I've just been scribbling notes, so it might be a little bit disjointed. It's like sorry for being a bit dim, but you mentioned MCS accreditation. I don't do TLAs.
And you're going to ask me exactly what it stands for now, and that's not my again, unfortunately, my area of expertise in the maintenance side of things. It's that I will send you the answer to that. That's absolutely not a problem.
Yeah.
Because if I say whatever I reach for now is going to be the wrong answer, I feel, in my mind. So
yeah, like I say, sometimes it's official spiel, and I need it to be councillor Joe Public understanding. So yeah, a copy of the slides have been much appreciated. Robert and John's mentioned some really, really good points there. Ventilation, damp and mould in K&H properties, that is something that does come to me quite a lot from our tenants. I love estate walkabouts. I absolutely love estate walkabouts. I have sorely missed them. But I'd like to see, I don't know, evolve a little bit more than just basically walking around with a notepad, jotting things down, because one thing that I am aware of is that a lot of people who live in our homes and neighbourhoods properties don't know who their housing officer is. So I think it needs to be a little bit more interactive with the housing officer knocking on people's doors and discussing the issue, whether it's mattress in the front garden or whatever. I think they ought to be a bit more bridge making. Stop as being. I'm conscious that would be with a bit of a faceless council, and I think we need to. I know COVID hasn't helped things, but I do feel that we are a little bit faceless, and that's why I love the K&H estate walkabouts. Sorry, it's going to be hard to drop the K&H, isn't it? I'm going to struggle with that. But when we have to estate walkabouts, I always suggest that we bring the community environmental support officers on, the CISOs, and we've got a really good Battling Spend neighbourhood policing team, and we do get the PCSOs joining as well. So I'd like to just see that, be a little bit more interactive, build up on the estate walkabouts, and also the estate action days. I think that's trying to get more of the tenants and residents involved and make it a bit more, a bit of a family day. And also what Robert mentioned earlier, that's the first thing I wrote down was support to TRAs. We've only got one TRA in Batley West, and that is one that's just been resurrected. So I want to see more support to get TRAs up and running as well. Can I just say, you're obviously doing something right, because when I tend to work with people who are on choose and move and they're struggling, if you suggest to them that, can you also start looking at maybe private rent and housing association, they don't want to. They want one of our properties. So obviously, you're doing something right there. One thing that I do want to mention is that I've got some wonderful residents who live in a quadrangle of bungalows, and their concerns been going on for quite a number of years is that they've only got one door into their bungalow, and they would like you to look at maybe some sort of other door being put into the property, because if there was a fire in their hallway, they can't climb out of a window. They're elderly, they can't get out of a window. So I think we need to be looking at, fire safety for some of these older properties.
Well,
let me just check. I think I've covered everything. Sorry. Thank you.
No, that's all right. Councillor, I mean, I'm sure it's probably in our plans, but without the actual address of that set of properties that you've talked about, it will be difficult to check. Would you mind just dropping us an email or sending it via Jodie so we can check up and come back to you?
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Eric. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Do you want to respond to any Gwen's points at all? Or do you just agree?
I do agree very largely, absolutely, and I think it's coming out sort of loud and clear. I think Michelle will talk about TRAs and how we already support those and how we'd be more than happy to try and take that support further. I think, as we said earlier, we're not just looking. I think, and this is before my time in K&H in the council, but my understanding of how TRAs operated in the past was they were the only mechanism really that we consulted with our tenants and customers through. Whereas what we've certainly done over the last 4 or 5 years is build a range of engagement mechanisms to engage as wide a group of people as possible. So I think it is coming back to Councillor Taylor's and others and Councillor Airedale's sort of points around getting as many people involved and hearing as many voices as possible. I think the estate walkabouts from Councillor Lowe, if we're missing a trick, and it seems like we must be missing a trick in not making sure that as councillors when they're taking place, and you can either come along with us or at least inform, in a sort of pre-estate walkabout action plan as to what we need to look at and whose door we need to knock on, if I can put it that way, then we must be missing a trick. And I'm sure we can easily put some mechanisms in place to start to address those kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just add to that. I mean, you're absolutely right, Councillor Lowe. I mean, I'd be surprised if we were ever doing a walkabout and not involving councillors. So Eric's right.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just?
Sorry,
I didn't say that. I didn't say that I'm not informed about the walkabouts.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's my interpretation.
I didn't say that because I do get notified, because I do badger the council, the housing officers to tell me when they are going out, and if I can join them, I can do.
Thank you.
It's the lack of interaction with the residents when we're actually doing the estate walkabout. Sometimes they're a bit swift.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just one point, if it's all right, Councillor Uppal. In terms of TRAs, Eric's right and you're right. And we are still trying. And if you talk about the same one in Batley that I went to see last week, I mean, they're brilliant. They're re-energised, reinvigorated, and we will continue to support TRAs to do that. However, we've also got a strong focus on involving more tenants who are younger. And they don't operate in the same way. They come around, they might get involved in around an issue, but not necessarily are going to commit to a group consistently. So we're having to change our model to meet the needs of all our tenants, particularly those where we still have a high level of underrepresentation. But our TRAs are here to stay. We will continue to support them. We're just wrapping around more and different ways to make sure that we try and find a way for anyone who wants to be involved to be involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I've got Martin and then John. John, did you want to come on this specific point? Okay, do you want to quickly come in and then we'll bring Martin in?
I was going to explain what, well, I've got a couple of points, but I'll just explain what the MCS is for Gwen. It's Microgeneration Certification Scheme. Obviously, I'm an expert on this, or rather Mr. Google is. It's basically, it's the group that gives quality assurance to where we install any sort of, renewable energy schemes. So, solar panels, or this, we're now starting to talk about heat pumps and things like that, aren't we? So it's that, Gwen. I know no more than that. I only know what Mr. Google told me. I've got a couple of other questions, but I'll wait till after Martin.
Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Oh, heat pumps is very topical, John, isn't it? Today, it seems to be the thing that they're all talking about, and I suppose that's something for another day. We can have an in-depth look about that, because the interesting thing on that is you're using less gas but more electric, according to what Friends of the Earth were saying today. So an interesting one, looking at the wide reach environmental benefits. Some interesting points coming out of the presentation, and a number of things that I've raised with officers before, but I'm still waiting for answers. It seems like many months ago now, I asked officers what the policy was for staff taking what was at that time K&H vehicles home, because we seem to see them obviously around the district. As we're moving towards electric, there has to be an assessment of whether the staff member lives in a property that's suitable for charging. I'm anecdotally told by some members of staff they were given the opportunity of being early adopters, but told to park the car on the opposite side of the road from where the house is, so they need a long wire. I think we've all had an email from a gentleman this week highlighting another concern, which I have every sympathy with. In fact, I know both the location and the driver of the picture that we got. It's in the ward next door to me. Kirklees vehicles parking on the footway. This comes back to the point that when we're allowing staff to take home, and they are ambassadors for the council, and they're in the council now, we don't have that Chinese wall of that's K&H, it's not Kirklees. We shouldn't be having vehicles blocking the footway.
Absolutely.
If they haven't got somewhere where they can park at home, and the road is obviously available outside. So I'd like some more clarity on that. The issue about transition of vehicles is something that I raised just before Cabinet adopted the changeover, and I hope that we're only replacing vehicles and doing branding as they come to the end of their useful life. We've all said today that we've all talked about K&H and so on. In the 20 odd years of the existence of K&H, I would say that the most of the tenants and the majority of the residents would still refer to them as council housing. So it doesn't matter what it says on the tin in that respect, it's the council. So whether it says K&H Building Services or whatever, the only people that it portrays having a new logo are probably the people who are doing the logo wraps and stuff like that. To the man in the street, it's a council vehicle. So let's not be wasting money on rebranding until the vehicles, uniforms and everything else have come to the end of their life. When I mentioned the issue about safety of properties, and I think that is something that's very worrying. I'm sure it won't be applicable only in Batley, when if there were properties of a type, they may well have rolled out throughout the district at some point. And it does seem very a great concern. I hope officers come back with an early answer about how many properties we've got with only one door. And in those cases, what is the method of escape for a person in the event of a fire or other? And it may not totally be a fire. There could be an aggressive person at the front door or something they need to get away from. I've got concerns about that. The Betty Brow was mentioned, and I've just looked back on emails. In mid-September, I asked for a copy of the independent compliance review and improvement plan on fire safety, cladding and everything. I was told I'd be sent it, because it's something on which Cabinet and others have made decisions, but I, as a member, have not seen that. Cabinet made vague comments about, and others about, well, we're doing this because there are, I think it was 48 recommendations in the review. I'd like to look at the wider context of that, and hence why I asked in mid-September. I was told I'd be sent it. I wasn't told it was a confidential document. There was anything that elected members couldn't see, and indeed the members of the public should be entitled to see it. So I hope officers can rectify that and say, and it's something which should be available on our website and intranet for people to pick up. Looking at that, leading on to Berry Brow as a result of that, and Berry Brow being the example. Berry Brow Flats, as I understand it, are scheduled for demolition. I'm not sure, and I hope officers can clarify when the demolition time is. Prior to that, there will obviously be a period of leaving properties empty or decanting. But I'm told that prior to that, the council is going to be spending money bringing those homes up to the modern standards. Now, I hope that there's been a business case done for that. And again, I've not seen it, so apologies if there is one and it's not been circulated. Because if there's a cost of bringing a property that you're going to demolish up to standard, has somebody looked to say, well, what is the cost of decanting those people into short or medium term accommodation until the brand new homes that they're getting comes to being? Because in the eyes of the public, unless there's clear explanation and communication, doing up the property you're knocking down is going back to the terrible waste that we saw in the 70s and 80s, where as we came up towards the end of the council year, services were spending money like mad in March, because if they didn't spend it, the budgets would be cut, and the public found that was ridiculous. I mean, I can't complain because I used to make money when I ran a cleaning business doing end of year cleans for places that were closing down. But it was ridiculous, so that if we could have some clarity on that and certainty that the proper as well as the safety aspect, there is some financial overview looking at things like this temporary work. Thanks, Chair.
I think if I could try to answer that, Berry Brow, there is no date for demolition. We've only taken the indicative decision at the moment. The council and cabinet have. We haven't even actually started, to my knowledge, Michelle, the actual decanting of anybody at this moment in time. So we're still very much at the starting blocks of the whole process, and we are anticipating the process will take us something like 7 years. So this is not a short-term issue in that sense. The works that you're talking about are some of the fire safety and other works that need to take place, because obviously we can't leave people in properties which are not fire compliant. So that's been the business case from the point of view of doing those remedial works. But we're certainly not if I can just sort of pick the point up, we're not reinvesting in the flat. We're not going in and putting a new bathroom in or these kinds of things. It is absolutely the remediation works that are required for people to live there safely. That's the only works that are planned to take place over the next few weeks and months. Please don't ask me the cost of those off the top of my head. It's not expertise, but I'm sure we can find those kinds of things out for you. But as I say, we haven't even started that decanting process as yet. We've literally just gone through the initial consultation with customers. Don't know if there's anything more you think you could add, Michelle?
No, I think you've covered the main points. We're just agreeing the programme for the high rise, which includes obviously Buxton House as well, which is going to be improved. Some of the things will happen concurrently, some things will have to happen sequentially. You mentioned decanting. That to some degree will determine the pace, because we have to make sure that the families that we move have somewhere that they can consider home. They'll be out for a long period of time if they want to return. Some may not and want to do one move. So each individual family circumstances will be taken into account. But other than that, Eric, I think you've covered everything.
With the exception of my request and to know about the independent compliance review,
Yeah, that's outside of our area. We need to check upon that because it doesn't sit within our areas of work. I wasn't aware of that request.
But again, if somebody's been promised that, I'm sure we can make sure it's made available.
Yeah.
I look forward to receiving it. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, thank you, Martin. And John, and then we're going to round everything up. You're on mute, John.
That's so annoying. Two quick points, really. One, there's been some discussion around TRAs. We don't really have any TRAs in my patch, and I, with my ward colleagues, pushed back against an attempt to set one up, and this is about the one size doesn't fit all. The Kirkburton ward is a series of small villages. Every village has a village association, and this is my point I was making earlier. I want the tenants to feel part of the village, and so we would encourage activity to be run through village associations rather than having a village association for those people who aren't K&H residents and then a separate thing for K&H tenants. That may be a model that works elsewhere across the district as well, and it's worth considering. We shouldn't always try and separate out our tenants in, from the rest of because as you've said, a lot of the issues that they'll be talking about resonate with all residents in that area. Along a similar line, I think there's possibly something to think about around. We talked about estate days, we talked about estate walkabouts, we've also talked about place standard. All of those inform activities that need to happen, and councillors need to be at the heart of that. But also, I think that there is some monies now being put aside for responding to place standard initiatives. So I think look at it in the round. Somebody needs to be looking at that in the round of we're doing place standards. It's identifying issues in a particular locality, a particular place. That will also be informed by perhaps some walkabouts that have been done and discussions that have been had. Let's organise an estate day, but not an estate day. Let's organise a place day where we try and get councillors involved and other residents.
Yeah.
And if there are issues around, doing a village clean-up or a neighbourhood clean-up or whatever it may be, or trying to organise some sort of celebration of something. So just give that a bit of thought, to think a bit more broadly and widely, rather than it always being specifically around just the estate, just the tenants. And let's try and start to do that Peter and I both talked about broadening out and making it more inclusive about everybody in a particular place or area. And I think I'll leave it at that, if I may. And I think Michelle's picking that one up by the sounds of things. But and I appreciate that, Michelle.
Okay, perfect. I can see Michelle's made quite a bit of notes there, so that's helpful. More hands are going up. This is it now, guys. No more hands because we've got another item coming. They're waiting as well. So I've got Liz and I've got Martin, and then that's it. I'm not taking any more after that. Okay, so
no, yeah, mine's just really quick. Yeah. Just in relation to a point Martin made about the flats, there is actually an ad hoc scrutiny panel that is currently in operation, looking at health and safety compliance in high rises. Okay, thank you.
That was very good, Liz. I like that. And yeah, it's a very fair point. We did need to mention that as well. Right, Martin, can you be as speedy as Liz? Do you want to?
Yeah, I've just looked up. It's the cost of replacing the fire doors is £600,000, and the whole process of knocking down the flats at Bury Brow and then rebuilding with low rise is a total 7-year project. So they'll be knock them down and clear. So the man in the street spending over £500,000 when you're going to be knocking him down probably within 3.5 years. I think we need to have a good communications why we're not looking for temporary homes for those people. For £600,000, you could find a lot of homes, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let the others come in on that as well, but I think we do have to be very clear if those fire doors aren't currently compliant. I think it's to do with how it was recorded from my understanding at the time. Then we can't wait. It has to be done now.
Yeah.
That recording issue should have been picked up perhaps earlier, but they have to go and do it. Really, I guess that's what I would say, Matt. But I understand
I think the recording as well, Chair, is that the doors were replaced a while ago, but as I understand it from looking back, nobody had the receipts or something to clarify.
That's right.
So, yeah, and again, that's very strange that we can't track down the purchase in quality of doors for flats. It doesn't reflect well.
I think what I would say, I absolutely agree that it doesn't reflect well in that regard. Unfortunately, we are not alone in this, and it's actually not the purchasing and receipt of a door that's the issue. It's actually having the certification for the door at that moment in time. Yeah. And actually lots of previous companies, I'm not trying to name names or anything else, supplied doors saying that they were 30-minute certificated and 50-minute certificated, etc., but then did not supply those certificates, and it's the actual test certificates, the third-party test certificates, not just the things they've done themselves. So that's where we've fallen down, as of many other providers, I'm afraid. This is a national issue.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Eric. Fair point. And in that regard, obviously the doors must be. We have to make sure they're compliant, whether we've got a certificate or not. But fair point from Martin that. I'm sure you'll learn from this situation as well. So I'm just going to quickly round up. There was a lot of points made. So we had about the tenant voice, making sure the tenant voice is paramount. There is TRAs in place, but it's you mentioned 40 actually, but in some places it's not as consistent as we would like. So continuing the work on that. There was a point about the relationship with KCA. Which sits with the economy infrastructure team, which is something that team needs to be thinking about that relationship. Risk assessment around ventilation and making sure we've got an urgent response on that one. Really, that's an important one. Dampness and mould. Obviously, it's not something that we want tenants to be facing, but probably as councillors, it's something that's probably one of the things that comes back most to us. So again, just having a look at that. The makeup of the advisory board in terms of councillor representation. Obviously, a decision has been made at the moment. There's one councillor sitting on it, but there's some concerns here, whether that's enough or not. Support to residents as a whole in a place. And I think that's a fair point. There's obviously a lot of expertise that can be learned from K&H staff who have now come in-house, and how can the rest of the council learn some of that expertise from them, particularly around the private sector team that we have in place as well at the council. We want a copy of the slides. John found out what the MCS accreditation is, so right there. Something I can't. Housing officers. Obviously, I think a lot of us do get. I know I get emailed when the housing officers are doing the estate management, but there is something about the estate walkabout. So what should that look like longer term? When I have done it, sometimes it is a bit of a walk around, and should we be doing something much more holistic, as that has been mentioned from colleagues as well. Estate management is a key issue that yourselves are prioritising. So I think that's something I would like to see you come back and give progress on that. Properties with one door, if that is the case, can you let us know what's happening around the fire assessments around those? And Martin mentioned a independent compliance report. So if we can make sure that's shared as well. It's quite a lot there, but obviously we will note that down for years.
All right, I've taken notes. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, that was a very long session in the end, so that we appreciate you staying with us for as long as you did.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very pleased to be invited. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again. Thank you. And we'll have you back again soon, no doubt. So
bye-bye.
Bye. See you. Right, I'm going to swiftly move on then. And we're going to bring in the hot food takeaway item. Now, I think are all colleagues here for this item? Stephen, I don't know if Stephen's going to be one of the members talking about this. Okay, so whenever colleagues are ready, I can see. Oh, Matthias, are you leading on this one? I know you have to go at 3 o'clock. Go ahead, Matthias. Can you actually join?
Yes, I can. I've been allowed in. Thank you. Thanks, Jodie. Hannah Morrison will present the item, and Joe Scrutton and myself are here to assist with any comments members may ask us to provide. But yeah, I do have to leave at 3, but between Hannah, Joe and myself, I'm sure we can help members with any questions you need. So on that note, I'll go mute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I should just say that we've got Councillor Khan here as well, who's the Cabinet member, and Councillor McBride. They're both their portfolios fit into this, so I'm sure they'll come in at some point. But go ahead, Hannah.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Chair. I do have a presentation, so if Jodie could put that on screen. And also here we have Lucy Weymouth and Beth Wallace from Public Health, who will talk to you later on about the toolkit, and also here to answer any questions as well that anybody may have. So I'll just wait for the presentation. So yeah, so Public Health are here. So this is the hot food takeaway supplementary planning document. I'll refer to that as an SPD throughout this presentation. So this SPD has been jointly produced with ourselves in planning policy, public health and environmental health. So it has really been a joint piece of work. And it sets out a framework on how planning applications relating to hot food takeaways will be assessed. So next slide, please. So just really what we're wanting from Scrutiny. So the purpose of today is to highlight the approach that we've taken in this emerging draft hot food takeaway SPD, and as I've already said, to allow for questions and comments, and to note the next steps as well. So we do want to go out. We aim to go out for public consultation on this draft document on the 9th of November. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background on SPDs. So we produce them in planning to add clarity to existing policies within our local plan. So in this case, this SPD adds more guidance to LP16 and LP47, which are 2 policies relating to, one is relating to health and the other one's relating to food and drink uses. So once this SPD is adopted, it'll be a material consideration in planning decisions, but they don't form part of the development plan. So next slide, please. So the purpose of this SPD, I suppose I've already mentioned, it seeks to provide detailed guidance on how planning applications for hot food takeaways will be assessed. Some of the principles within this guidance will also apply where existing hot food takeaways may apply for planning permission to vary conditions, perhaps for opening hours, for example. So some of the policies principles will relate to that. What we've had to do with this SPD is achieve a balance, a difficult balance really, between health issues within the district, health and wellbeing issues within the district, and the needs of businesses, and in particular small businesses that may be affected by this SPD. So what we have proposed to do is not a blanket ban on hot food takeaways, which some other authorities and some of our neighbouring authorities have done with their hot food takeaway SPDs, but we're not proposing a blanket ban, but we're wanting to use public health intelligence data. So that's when I mentioned the public health toolkit, and we wanted to use that data alongside a range of other considerations, so that the approach that we have is proportionate. We are aware as well that this SPD is not the only solution to the issues that we have in Kirklees relating to health and obesity. There are already a number of initiatives within the council that, and we work with businesses as well, that sort of promote healthy food options and advice. And this SPD does include signposts to all council initiatives that are available to businesses and our residents. So the next slide, please. Just a little bit about the health context. There's a lot of information and data that sets out the justification for the need for this SPD. It is all going to be set out in the document when it's published for public consultation. But there are a number of, the council have got commitments to proving out to our residents' health. So there's our council plan and the healthy weight declaration that I know that Lucy may talk a little bit about later. On this slide also there's a few key statistics for Kirklees. So I'll just read one out. Approximately 1 in 4 of reception age children and 1 in 3 of year 6 age children have excess weight, and over half of all adults in Kirklees are overweight or obese. There's also research that shows there's links between levels of deprivation and number of fast food outlets, and that there's the highest density of fast food outlets in the most deprived areas. So all that information and justification is set out in the document. So if we move on to the next slide, there are 7 principles set out in this SPD. 4 of them are based around residential amenity issues. There's 1 on town centre, vitality and viability, 1 around schools, and another one around using the public health toolkit, which is the public health intelligence data. So if we just move on to the slide, and we'll just talk a little bit just about the 4 residential amenity ones. So these are sort of factors that are already considered in the planning process. So yeah, noise, odours, waste disposal. It isn't anything that we don't already do as part of the planning process when determining an application for hot food takeaway. This is just giving more clarity really to the applicants, to residents, and to the officers who make the decisions on the application. So it's sort of setting out what we already do in detailed guidance for those 4 issues. The waste disposal one is also the waste disposal one. I'll talk about that. We'll go on to the next slide. Vitality and viability of centres. So this is all about our town centres. Again, this is we already do this, and it relates to the impact on our town and local centres. It's important that we achieve a mix of uses. So this principle is really for trying to avoid the clustering of takeaways. So, for example, no more than 3 in a row, and clustering. So that's what this aims to do. But we also, there is some flexibility built into this policy. So we would take into account if there's a significant proportion of vacant units within a centre. We'd look at the individual circumstances of that unit. So how long it's been vacant for, whether there's been any interest in it being taken. So that is built into this principle as well. And then the last point as well on this is because we're wanting to make sure our centres are vibrant, we wouldn't really want shutters of these premises being shut during the day because they open at night. So this principle also, it'd be a condition that the shutters are open. We'll move on to the next slide. So the next principle is really seeking to improve childhood obesity. So what we're seeking to do with this SPD is restrict the opening hours of hot food takeaways that are proposed within 400 metres of a school. So this is all schools, primary and secondary schools. 400 metres represents a 5-minute walk time. We've done it differently for primary schools and for secondary schools. So primary schools, it will be conditioned that that the hot food takeaways aren't open between 3 and 5 because this is the school finishing time. But secondary schools not open before 5 because secondary school pupils are likely to go out of school at lunchtime. So that's the reason we've done it by that way. With this policy, to reflect the fact that our principal centres and our town centres are wanting to be destinations, we don't propose that the school restriction would apply in those. So that's Huddersfield, Dewsbury, Batley, Cleckheaton, Holmfirth and Heckman Wyke. So this policy wouldn't apply in those centres. The next slide, please. So I'm going to, the final principle relates to the public health toolkit to determine whether planning permission for a new hot food takeaway should be refused. Again, with the approach for schools, we're not proposing that this would apply in our principal centres or our town centres. What I'm going to do now is just pass over to Lucy, who will talk you through the next 2 or 3 slides around the public health angle and the use of the public health toolkit.
Thank you, Hannah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lucy. I work in public health. So, like Hannah said, I'm going to talk through a bit of the kind of the history and the context to how we've come to the decision around the public health tool. Because I work in public health, I can't do any presentation without talking about the wider determinants of health. So this is an infographic which shows the obesogenic environment, and it kind of nicely shows the kind of complexities of the environment in which people live. So you can see it ranging from kind of lifestyle factors through to the local economy and environment, and you can see up in the blue slide there the points around the density and use of hot food takeaways. So we know that hot food takeaways are one element of many of which the council and partners are kind of focused on in terms of how we enable people to live as healthy lives as possible. Like Hannah has said, it's kind of borne out in the evidence that we can see that there is a relationship between deprivation and obesity. And also we know that in the more deprived areas, you're more likely to get quite significant hot food takeaway clustering. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to give a bit of context, when we started this piece of work, about 2 years ago now, one of the first things that I did was do some research into what was happening in other areas, so what was happening for other SPDs for hot food takeaways. And what I found was that whilst obesity is always part of the SPD in terms of the narrative, in terms of this is why we need an SPD, it was never actually part of the decision-making process, which felt a bit strange to me. The only area that I could find that did include obesity in the decision-making process was somewhere up in the northeast. And what they've done is, if obesity is above 10% in that area, in the area of the application, then the application will be rejected. And to me, that felt like a really blunt tool. So it was really kind of black and white, yes or no kind of decision making. That obviously isn't something that we wanted to do here, but what we wanted to do was kind of bring together the need to bring together kind of public health and planning in terms of decision making, and using public health intelligence to inform place-based decision making, but doing it in a way which is as flexible and proportionate as possible. And hopefully that's what we've done. So the other thing to state is what Hannah already mentioned, really, is that this is part of a suite of other things, so it does support other council priorities. We've obviously made a commitment to the Healthy Weight Declaration, and a hot food takeaway SPD is kind of considered within that broader context of the Healthy Weight Declaration. And obviously we've got the DPH annual report, which had a big focus on inequalities, and again we know there's significant inequalities in terms of obesity and deprivation. So if I just talk you through what happens with the actual tool itself. So public health intelligence colleagues have done some really clever modelling, and they've brought together a number of key indicators which kind of show the impact that obesity has within a certain area. And so the intelligence we've got is either at ward level or LSOA level. And the intelligence which is in the tool is levels of deprivation, the percentage of adults who are overweight, percentage of adults who are obese, percentage of year 6 children with excess weight and reception children with excess weight, as well as diabetes and coronary heart disease. And what happens is we've kind of brought those together, and if a number of those indicators are significantly above the Kirklees average, then from a public health perspective, we would recommend that based on health grounds that takeaway wouldn't open. So, but again, to go back to that kind of flexible and proportionate thing that I mentioned, what that means in reality is public health intelligence have worked it out that about if you put in all of the postcodes for Kirklees, what this will mean in practice is that around 80% of postcodes in Kirklees would kind of be accepted using this tool. So 20% would be rejected, but the majority of them would still go through. The other thing to mention is that even if that were the case and public health made a recommendation that the hot food takeaway application was rejected, we've built mitigation into the toolkit because we're kind of conscious of that bringing together of the health and the economy. We're not wanting to kind of stifle the local economy and the local business. So if there's a reason why planning colleagues feel that it's really important that a hot food takeaway is able to open in that area, despite what the public health tool is saying, it can still go through to the rest of the SPD process. So if there's been a vacant shop for like over a year, for example, and the economy and the local environment would benefit from having it open, then it would still go through to the rest of the process. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Well, the next slide is basically a summary of what I've already said. So that, oh, here we go. So this is, you can see here what's in the tool itself. So these are the indicators which we've included. So we've tried to make it as kind of holistic as possible. So, you know, as an example, before I was talking about the place in the Northeast, which just looked at obesity data, you can see here we've brought together a number of other kind of indicators to try and make it as holistic as possible. I think that's it from me. I know we've not got much time, so yep, next slide.
Yep. That's it for the presentation, Chair. Just the last slide is just setting out our next steps in terms of producing this SPD. So the public consultation, as I already mentioned, we hope to start on the 9th of November. That would run for 6 weeks to be finished before Christmas. And then, of course, we'll need time to go through that, and then it'd be a cabinet decision to adopt maybe mid next year. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Jodie will pop the slides down. I just wanted to check again, Lucy, in the tool it's saying 80% of the postcodes would be accepted. So that means 80% of the areas the public health indicators are showing a problem, or they are showing a problem.
No, it would mean 80% of the postcodes would be kind of accepted using the tool. So they wouldn't be significantly above the Kirklees average. Okay, so basically it'd be fine to have a takeaway from a public health perspective. From a public health perspective, yeah. I've got my colleague Beth here from Intelligence as well. So Beth, if I say anything which is wildly wrong, please do jump in.
Will do.
Thank you.
Some of the figures around obesity and stuff, overweight kids and stuff, you know, quite significant, but you're saying it's just they're very, very focused in particular areas. So I guess it's showing, some of the issues of it, but a lot of it is just very densely populated. We're saying that 20% is it's just interesting for me, those figures, like the numbers are quite high. We're saying half of the population. I mean, I know you're not only looking at obesity, you're looking at a lot of things, but it means where they are already, it's just very densely populated with those takeaways.
It's the combination of the indicators. So our tool doesn't look at the doesn't include the clustering of takeaways. That is included in another bit of the SPD, isn't it, Hannah? The clustering is accounted for in another section of the SPD. So our bit, the public health bit, is just on those indicators that were on the slide earlier, not the clustering. Although what you probably find is that there would definitely be a correlation between those areas.
Deprivation and all the other obesity.
All of the other, yeah, and clustering. There will be a correlation with that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it, for a place to be rejected, Beth, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, it would have to score above the Kirklees average on all of the indicators. So it's not saying that 80% of the postcodes within Kirklees have below or average obesity, because it's a combined it's combined over all 7 of them.
So you'd need over half and all 7 of them.
I hope that's correct.
Yeah, that's right, Hannah. Yeah,
that's right. I understand you're being proportionate, absolutely, but are we being too cautious?
Well, do you want me to answer that, or do you want to have a conversation?
Are we being too cautious with this? Like,
I think we worked really hard to try and find a place that will kind of recognise the public health impact, but also not wanting to kind of stifle the local economy. But I mean, it would be, I guess, we'd be kind of seeking feedback on this today. I can see Matthias has put his camera on as well. Yeah. Do you want to come in, Matthias?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucy and Hannah. Life's a balance, and planning is a manifestation of that very clear balance. We have to start somewhere. We are starting from an evidence-based approach, Chair, as best we think is fair and reasonable. And this is a consultation. This is to gauge people's opinion on the implementation of our balance between the economic considerations of our towns and our small businesses versus tackling health. That doesn't mean that this document can't be revisited at a future period in time. It is a council planning guide, in effect, that goes through a formal process. But once we've adopted it, we can revisit it, and we have, as part of this document, a commitment to review the data as we go periodically to see how it's performing. And if we find that we are being too conservative in our balance, then that's something that as a council members can ask us to revisit to see whether we should strike a different balance between tackling health inequalities and the economic factors. But overall, it is quite an ambitious document to start with, I think. And I think those issues that Hannah and Lucy have identified, where the majority of the borough won't score so highly that planning applications should be refused on that consideration alone, doesn't stop members making decisions that they feel is right. It gives them an evidence base from which to start with, and let's track the performance as it goes. And if we need to go further, we've got the tools here to revisit it. So it's a journey, isn't it? I think, and it's an important step. So I'll stop there because I appreciate lots of members have got their hands up. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I can see lots of members have got their hands on, so I will move on. I just want to sort of say I do agree with the tool. I think it's a good thing, actually. I want to see, particularly like the fact public health has been so involved in this, and we know from some of the indicators that you're showing, you know, we have issues around health qualities, particularly around obesity, and a lot of it seems to be linked in with deprivation. Some of the stats are showing that, and the figure around the 20% suggests some, you know, clustering there of a number of issues as well in a very focused areas. So I do think it's a good thing. I guess I'm just asking some questions at this stage, that's all. But, you know, it's a good initiative to see. So I'll bring other members in. I can't remember who was first, but I think it was Robert. I think I saw his hand come halfway into the presentation. So let me bring him in first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in obviously the this matrix that has been created, because in my ward of Gorka, the village of Gorka is fine. Longwood, they'd love takeaways, as in Cowlersley, but we get to the top of Paddock and in Milnes Bridge, which is absolutely inundated with them. How can local members get hold of this matrix so we can go and study it and be able to work out whether a new takeaway in, I use Milnes Bridge because that's certainly the most of it. Because it has a primary school, is a site that we could possibly object to.
Yeah, the toolkit will be available online, and basically you'll just put a postcode in, and it just calculates the result. So it will be available as part of the SPD, so that all residents, councillors, applicants could go onto it before they submit an application and find out how their ward scores.
And if you can tell me exactly how to get onto this online, because my IT skills are legendary. No.
Yeah. Yeah, we will do. Yeah.
If you
when
could
it is, yeah, it's not now. Yeah.
Instructions. I haven't got one imminent, but it'd be interesting to look at it first, because, as I say, depending on all the wards are likely to be the same. They'll have places where yes please we'll have a takeaway, and places where no thank you, we've already got 1,500. Okay, yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I know Peter and Muzz have got their hands up as well, but I'll just take a couple of more questions from panel members and I'll bring you guys in as well. So Gwen, I think your hand up was next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lucy, Hannah and Matthias, for that presentation. Can I ask again, could I have a copy of the slides, because I find them useful for quick reference, please? Not so much questions, I think more comments. I do agree that we do need a tool. My ward of Batley West, we don't have a town centre, so any takeaways within our ward are spread quite widely across the ward. But like when it comes to Batley Town Centre, every time, you know, we get a new takeaway, as Brenda from Bristol would say, not another one, because we seem to have lots of takeaways in Batley. But I find that when people complain about new takeaways open, it's not actually what type of food is available from that takeaway, it's the problems that those takeaways bring with them, i.e. the amount of litter and people parking on the pavements to pick their takeaway up. I'm just interested in the avoiding clustering and no more than 3 takeaways in a row. I mean, there are areas within Kirklees where you do have more than 3 takeaways in a row, but we've got a lovely new development in Batley Town Centre. It's turned an eyesore into a lovely building, but it is predominantly just for takeaways. So how does that affect that? Yeah, nice new precinct. Thank you.
Yeah, so the town centre vitality and viability policy, we wouldn't want to create a cluster of 3 or more hot food takeaways together in a row, or if it reduces the number of units in a different use, sort of in between clusters as well, to 1 or more. That's what the SPD is going to aim to do, just to so that there's choice really for people using the centres and using the row of shops, so they're just not all of the same use.
So the issue is about vitality, isn't it, of a centre? So we've talked about there's a health consideration here. Those environmental factors you referred to, Councillor Lowe, are relevant planning considerations, and members would and officers would have to gauge whether those were acceptable in terms of, are they providing bins? Is there an issue with parking and deliveries? They're planning considerations that this document gives guidance on as well. And then in terms of the impact on a local centre. It's about having a range of types of businesses that people can use that centre with, so it sustains it through the day and through the evening. So coming to a balance again about the numbers of clusters, 3 seemed the appropriate number to arrive at. Where you've got high concentrations already, they're historic examples, and we can't undo what's already in, but we can plan for the future, and we can try and balance and manage the future growth so that our centres have a fair chance of staying viable, being attractive, and having a range of services for people. They aren't an over concentration of one type of use or another. So it's a range of tools at our disposal, which this SPD gives you guidance on and applicants on before they start to decide to purchase or rent a property in the first place. So it's about certainty as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. Mus, do you want to come in at this point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This policy demonstrates how we're going to use public health intelligence to tackle wider determinants of health inequalities. And for me, the main benefit of this policy is to allow us to influence the hot food industry to provide healthier food options and access support and advice from the FINE team as to how they can offer more, how businesses can offer more nutritionally balanced menus. The FINE team, it stands for the Food Initiatives and Education Project, and that at the moment is optional, but it will be offering free one-to-one support and consulting or consultation or specific masterclasses for fast food takeaways, and to help them to access where they can make improvements and improve their menu choices for the public. So it's not a simple, no, you just can't have a hot food. There is options there to access that additional support and advice.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in a couple of more members before I bring Peter in. So Martin.
Yeah. Sounds okay.
We can't really hear you, Martin. Can you speak up?
Okay.
It's very low, very, very low. Can you say something now? Can't hear you. Can't hear. If you take the headphones out, just see if that works.
Where it picks up from anywhere else?
It's very low at the moment, Martin. Very, very. Let me bring John in, and then we'll see if someone can help you with your connection, and we'll come back to you. Okay. Okay, John Taylor, if you want to come in now, we'll try and come back to Martin.
I quite like Martin being very, very quiet, actually. I think it's an improvement. And he can't respond either. Just a couple of points. Yeah. We can hear us now. That's unfortunate. I
could hear you anyway.
A bit of a definition about town centres, but I think I probably got it at some point. So when I'm thinking, I'm thinking parochially about my own ward, it would mean that we didn't have anywhere that was defined as a town centre. So we're not looking at village centres in that respect as far as this SPD is concerned.
We are.
Sorry?
Yes, we are. We're looking at all centres in that respect.
But the qualification about certain of the planning considerations won't be applicable in a town centre, would not be applicable to my village centres in my ward. I think I'm saying, Peter.
It would. Like the village of Mole Green, for example, which would very much apply to there, as it would in parts of Kirkburton, as it might at Flockton and so on.
Right, John.
Sorry, so can I ask one of the officers to clarify them, please? Because that's not my understanding.
Yeah, basically all of the principles within this SPD applies to hot food takeaways within the all of Kirklees, apart from 2 of them, which is the schools, the proximity to schools policy principle and the toolkit, which at the moment we are proposing that those 2 will not apply within our principal town centres, which are Huddersfield and Dewsbury, as defined in the local plan, and our town centres, which are Batley, Cleckheaton, Heckman White and Holmfirth. So all our district centres and our local centres it will apply to.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. That is what I understood. So I'm absolutely fine with that. Two further questions, if I may. Just picking up on what Muz said, which I was very supportive of around fine. My only concern is, if I've understood it right, that's an advisory service, so we couldn't enforce that in any way. And what I wouldn't want to see is takeaways being able to get round some of the regulations or the planning considerations by saying they'll work with fine and then 3 months later suddenly changing the menu again. So well, I just have a little worry about how that might work out in practice. I think the fire system come in.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. You can't put a condition on that says show us your menu and we'll grant you a permission. But what you can do with these types of documents is work collaboratively with businesses to help develop opportunities for their diversification of their menu. And that's what Fine does. That's what some of the other initiative does. And so planning's part of the journey, but a lot of it is about education and creating choice that people can see as viable business opportunities at the same time. So it's a multifaceted approach that I think the document tries to do, but at its core, it's as Hannah's set out, those are the planning considerations, and the rest is education and assistance for businesses.
Call me cynical, but I just worry that some businesses might try and take advantage of our understanding. So I'm just a little nervous about that. But
there wouldn't be planning considerations on that point. That's an aside, a benefit of it, but not a planning consideration.
My final one, and it probably is to you, Matthias, again around this, and I think this is excellent. I think it's really, really good. But you know, there will be some learning as we go through, once we adopt this and start to work with it. So just in terms of tweaking it, and it might be the public health toolkit that we want to tweak some of the parameters on. Is that something we will be able to do without going through a big formal process like we're going through here, or would we have to go back around the loop again in terms of adopting a new SPD?
You wouldn't adopt a new, but you can update an SPD, but there is a consultation process to that. Hannah's probably better placed to guide you on the nuances of that part, but in essence, you would ask people their opinion of what the changes were we wanted to put in place, because it's working with rather than doing to. It's all of that. And that gives the document more weight in planning terms if it's been through consultations. So if you ended up at an appeal, for example, a planning inspector would be very conscious of, have they followed the processes of supplementary planning documents? If they have, then great weight is afforded to that document in terms of its planning significance for decisions and appeals.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go to Martin, and then if the cabinet members want to respond afterwards on these points.
Thanks, Chair. Is that working any better, Chair?
It is. We can hear you now. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the principle of SPDs is okay. The practice we've had a few problems with. So the first question is, has this been pressure tested with legal? Because there was an SPD brought in a while ago that I believe was legally challenged after it was passed. So it had been through consultation, implemented, and then had a legal challenge and got dropped. So that's the first thing. We don't want to be making the same mistake again. SPDs are not infallible. I promoted an SPD when we were in Cabinet to secure developer contributions from what was that time called the Kirklees Strategic Economic Zone. One of those would have brought in £500,000 for highway improvements through the Cooper Bridge scheme. When the developer went for an application, that contribution was waived because they challenged it. So we had an SPD, it set a levy, and the developer challenged it and got away. So we have to be mindful that these, whilst they may have good intention, they can be difficult to implement. We've also got to look, it's not just for someone's health. A child can spend a considerable amount of their young life at school. That school is not necessarily in the ward where they live. And I'll use Mirfield as an example. Quite obviously, we have a secondary school and a sixth form college, which draws pupils from around the whole area, Ashbrown and many other areas indeed. So we have a 400-metre exclusion zone around Mirfield Free Grammar School. The existing takeaways and things like that are outside that. I've just looked on Google. 400 metres is 5 minutes walk, according to Google. And Google's our friend as well, John. And so a student, and particularly as you get towards secondary, sixth form, with 3 periods, has plenty of spare time in an hour lunch break. 5 minutes there, 5 minutes back. Leaves you 50 minutes to find a takeaway at some point outside. So again, I'm concerned. I'd like to see some data on why that 400 metres has come out and how many takeaways there are within that parameter near schools. And again, the blunt instrument of using the LSOAs, and it gives the example here, and thankfully you're here, Chair. Cleckheaton and Ashbrown have high levels of obesity, present company accepted. But we're then saying that we're going to work on prevention, but we're not going to, we're going to cure those by stopping further takeaways in those areas, but we're not going to do prevention in other areas. So obviously business being what it is, if somebody can't open up in Ashbrown, then they might come down the road and open up in Mirfield. And again, as an example, as I've mentioned before, I go on the odd occasion to Marston's Takeaway in your ward. It's just across the border and probably go through Calderdale to get to it, but people will travel for food, and particularly hot food and convenience food. So we need to have a look at that. Does the exclusion zone apply to colleges, universities and places of further education? Because again, we've got the likes of Kirklees College, Huddersfield Uni and things like that. So, and I think there are a number of hot food takeaways within 400 metres of either of those campuses. We've also seen, it was mentioned that mitigation can come into play, and we've seen that at planning, where you've got a reason for refusal or something. And I think when there was one up at planning last week where there was a reason for refusal for a housing extension, officers had mentioned it and the planning committee allowed it. So we've got to be mindful that depending on the local pressures. And yeah, I was heartened by some degree that not all hot food takeaways are equal. Some are more equal, if they're healthy hot foods. But as has been alluded to, somebody could open a healthy hot food and try saying that very swiftly, but then change the menu either at lunchtime or something else. And again, that would, I think, need to be conditioned that if somebody was opening a hot food takeaway within any of the areas, then we have the facility to condition it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll tell you what, I'll just bring the cabinet members in first, if that's all right, and then the officers can come in. So, Muz.
I would just like to thank everybody for their comments, and I think the overall panel is in support of this policy. And just to address some of the issues brought up, I think there's a gap in the local hot food industry in Kirklees in terms of the offer of healthy choices. And I believe there's a real business case and opportunities here in Kirklees for businesses to open up and have thriving hot food, healthy hot food on offer. And because we are more health conscious, and I'm seeing more healthy ready meals available in supermarkets. So it would be just following that trend really. And we know in other places, bigger cities, that there's more healthy takeaways available than there are here in Kirklees. Now, we can't stop people from feeding their children unhealthy takeaways or unhealthy food, but what we can do is try and influence the hot food market and bring awareness to the issue. And I think this policy does that. It brings awareness and it puts those eating habits and obesity at the forefront of people's minds. And like Matthias said, this policy can be revisited and developed, but it's really good to see a commitment really from everybody on this panel to doing something.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mus. And I guess we also know environment plays a big part, doesn't it? For some parents, it's the cheapest option and it's widely available in some particular areas, isn't it? So there's that, and hopefully this would help with that. But Peter, do you want to come in? And then
very much so. We're not time to. The local plan provides the framework for all development. Subsequently, we provide guidelines for the operation of locally determined decisions. It's an opportunity for us to use planning as a creative tool to make and support wider priorities of the council. This guideline is one of 8 or so developed since the plan was approved to clarify council's policy directly related to local plans. So we would take into account, for example, the number of takeaways there would be in a given area, their proximity, their location, obviously the broad health priorities which affect the area, and things like the disposal of materials that go with the with takeaways. So all those factors would be taken into account. Just to illustrate the point, Moor Green's part of my ward. It's been totally transformed by takeaways. Now, frankly, if we'd had a policy like this, we could have stopped the total change of that area. And Moor Green's just one example. There are numerous areas being transformed because of a lack of planning or the lack of the ability to control by planning. And therefore, we've got to use it wisely and sensibly, not to, just stop all takeaways, but be very sure and very effective in terms of their exact location and their impact on the travelling public, and most importantly, of course, children in various different schools. And this is what this is about. So it's a combination of course, the health policy, but directly related to the planning ability that we've got and the tools we have that we're in this case, putting in place to be able to control development.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to ask officers if they want to just come back on some of Martin's other points. So you did make a specific point about the 400 metre. Like, why was that decided as a thing? Why go on 400 metres?
Yeah, there is a lot of evidence and research around that use of that 400 metres. It is what other authorities use as well. And there will be a lot of information in the appendix of the SPD that sets out a justification for using 400 metres. So that information will be available. We've tried to base every decision in the SPD on evidence, or whether it be academic research or actual data. So that 400 metres is based on evidence and research and many academic papers.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make one other point. This is obviously about hot food takeaways, and you put in the programme about what comes under hot food takeaway and what doesn't. And obviously some of the what we might class as a takeaway, McDonald's or KFC, a lot would class, actually under rules would be classed as a restaurant, because there could be more than, I think you said previously, more than 50% can sit inside or something like that. So again, that's an interesting point, but obviously this wouldn't, for those where you can have more, you can have a certain capacity sitting down, they might still be very unhealthy, but because it's classed as a restaurant, it can't be covered under this SPD. And that, in that sense, maybe some more independent businesses, smaller businesses would be affected disproportionately. But I'd just be interested to know about, is it even possible to do anything with these sort of larger companies? I know they sit very differently because they are a restaurant, they're big multi-chains and stuff. So I guess evidence-based or trying to do something that might be more difficult, but it'd just be interesting to hear your views on that.
Yeah, it is based on the planning use class. So it is based on what was previously the A5 use class and defined as a hot food takeaway. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it applies equally, this SPD, to your large multinationals and your small businesses. And it applies to drive-throughs as well. That's classed as a hot food takeaway if it's just a drive-through. So we are trying to, you know, it's equal, and we're trying to sort of catch the bigger chains within this, but we are tied to what is defined as a hot food takeaway in the planning use class. Yeah, I mean, that's understandable. I mean, Lucy, I mean, what's your perspective on this as in public health? Because there must be just as many kids going to these larger ones, you know, as they are to sort of the more independent ones. I know it seems it's a bit more hamstrung with this though.
I think in terms of this SPD, like Hannah's kind of outlined, it's outside the realms of the hot food takeaway SPD. I mean, from a public health perspective, obviously I'm going to say I think it's brilliant that we're using public health to help inform planning decisions across the council. And I think, like Matthias said, it is quite an innovative approach that we're taking. So I think kind of taking on board what you were saying at the beginning around, are we being too cautious? I think it's probably quite important to be cautious at the beginning, because it is a new piece of work. We need to kind of measure it and see how it goes. And obviously from a public health perspective, we're doing a lot more than, you know, more broadly around public health in terms of what we're doing to kind of enable people and tackling obesity, you know, ranging from, you know, walking and cycling to wellness and, you know, a load of other things. But in terms of this your specific point around the kind of the restaurants, it's what we've got the power and the influence to do. And for this SPD, we don't have that within our kind of our remit, do we, Hannah? That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fine. Gwen, you've got your hand up, and then we'll better round it up because people probably need to go and do other stuff.
Yeah, I'm just going to say sorry, Harpreet. I need to leave. There's no options in the chat, so I just want to say I'm sorry I have to leave. But can I just say it's been an excellent meeting all afternoon. Thank you, and thanks to everybody for the contributions. Thank you,
Gwen. I'm sure lots of other people need to leave in a minute as well. So thank you. No problem at all. Well, thank you for coming along. That was really helpful. I think generally we think this is a good idea, you know, and definitely bringing in public health into this, you know, into planning on takeaways is really beneficial. Really beneficial. I guess as you go along, you'll want to tweak the tool and look at if there's changes that can be made. I mean, obviously I made that point around caution at the beginning, but you know, I guess you want to see how things work out with the SPD. But obviously we feel that's quite positive. I think there were a couple of points. There was the thing about fine, which sounds very good again, the fine initiative, which was mentioned. And I think John just asked about, is there anything else that could be done to really add on to the benefits of that programme, because it sounds like an excellent programme. I can't read my writing, this is what always happens. I think we covered the point on principal and town centres, so there was just some clarification around that, and we've defined those. I think that's it, and it's just basically, I think, making sure that we're updating the public health toolkit as required. Obviously, you're going on to consultation now, aren't you? for November and December. So it would be helpful to get an update after that stage, just to see what's come back from the consultation as well. So we'll have a look at that. So I think that's it. So thank you very much, those of you here for the hot food item. Nice to see you, and you can leave now if you want to.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye. Just moving on to the next item, which is the work programme, which is in your documents. Is there anything that anyone wants to say about the work programme? No? Okay. Well, that's it. Oh, sorry, any other business? I don't even know if we have that on the programme. I don't think we have got any other business. It's not an agenda item anyway. Well, thank you.
Excuse me, Chair, sorry. Sorry, Harpy.
Yes, go ahead, Martin, yes.
Yeah, just noticing on the work programme, it says April 2022, we've got the Transpennine route upgrade. Could we at least have an update at each meeting, because we're going into the period of legal challenge now. I understand that Kirklees has retained barristers. You know, I did ask at council for this, and I think for communities affected, we should be getting regular updates on what we're doing and if there are any mitigation. Thanks.
If I can come in and just provide a bit of an update. So I was on leading members last night, and Edward Highfield and Richard Hollinson came and provided a bit of an update on the Transpennine line. So you'll recall that at council back in whenever, I think it was May or earlier in the year anyway, I can't remember what it was, we passed a motion which enabled the council to take a position as an official objector to the plans, not because we particularly objected, but because we had issues and concerns that needed addressing. The long and the short of it, and it probably is one that we probably could do with Richard coming and giving an update on, is that there have been a myriad of discussions, conversations backwards and forwards with legal advisors, with Network Rail and other parties, and we are now in a position where we're much more comfortable with what is being proposed. They've secured changes and agreements that will enable some things to be dealt with by planning conditions, although I did raise the issue around, we all know how difficult it is to get planning conditions sometimes enforced. But I think that it probably is worth getting an update, because it was a much more positive response, and it looks like Network Rail are trying to do their best to meet us part way. So just a bit of an update, Martin. So there is things happening, and that was literally last night.
Thanks,
so
John.
We haven't had a chance to share that more broadly with the group. And I actually didn't know it was coming to leading members last night. It just turned up as an additional agenda item. It's literally hot off the press, but it's probably useful for other members.
Yes, that's fantastic. Okay, thank you for that.
I'm asking Richard to come and give an update at our next meeting, to be fair.
Yeah, well, let's see when we can get an update in. I mean, I think obviously we want it soon. I'm just mindful of a number of items we've got coming. If he doesn't come in person, maybe we can get a written update. I was
going to say, yeah, I would. Yeah. There was a presentation that was used last night, which I haven't got a copy of. Otherwise, I'd share it. But something like that, or a bit more detail behind that, might be useful.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that. We'll follow that up. Okay, I think that's it then. Thank you everyone for joining us, and goodbye.